Hi, welcome to Scaling Enterprise Risk Management Without Doubling Your Team, a case study in the financial services industry. My name is Jason Rolfe, and I'll be your host for today's session. Before we get started, just a little bit about myself, my background, as well as Onspring. So I'm the Vice President of Solutions with Onspring, been with the organization a little over 8.5 years. My team is primarily responsible for designing, developing, implementing, and improving the solutions that we offer on our cloud-based no-code platform, um, really to meet the best needs of our customers. So a little bit about Onspring. As I mentioned, at Onspring, we offer a cloud-based no-code platform that allows our customers to solve a wide variety of business problems. Here at Onspring, with our platform and our program, we really focus on three primary tenets. Number one is performance. We believe that a tool should enable you, should help you do your job more efficiently, and that's something that goes into every feature that we release in Onspring. Flexibility is another key tenet for us. Understanding that everybody has their own way of doing things, their own terminology, their own logic. We want you to be able to do your work your way. And to that point, user experience is the third primary tenet. So whether you're a casual, maybe once a quarter user of Onspring, or you're a heavy daily administrative user or anything in between, we want you to have a good experience in the platform. So today we're going to be sharing a story of a little bit of pain, some realization, and then ultimately some evolution. And we're really going to be focusing on things that are seemingly simple, but certainly very powerful when you really start putting all the pieces together. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, just a little bit about the case study. So the client that we were dealing with here, they're actually the second largest money transfer business in the world, obviously in the financial services industry. And as you can see, they account for about 20% of all global money transfers and operate all over the world in over 200 different countries. So really their improvement focus was really about centralizing data, improving efficiency, and creating real-time status reporting. Because as you'll see, they had a very sort of heavy burden to carry, and they were really looking for a way to enable them to do it much more efficiently and effectively. So to that end, let's talk a little bit about their responsibilities. You can see on this slide here, it's a very heavy responsibility, and really what we're dealing with is an information security information security director, a manager, and then 6 other analysts on the team. So a total of 8 people required to really kind of bear this heavy responsibility. So you can see everything in there from compliance, regulatory compliance and licensing, security awareness, internal and external audit readiness and preparation. So lots of different responsibilities, lots of very important aspects of being able to continue on as an organization. We're being managed by this team. And, given the nature of their business, given the industry they're in, understanding that there's likely no end in sight to the concepts of changing regulations, emerging operational challenges, security threats, when we're talking certainly about faith in the financial system and in financial IT, you could see that this is a very heavy burden to bear. And ultimately what we were dealing with was a very smart and capable team, but they had very daunting challenges. And we're going to explore some of those right now. Okay, talking about challenges, we all have them. We all understand that these are things that we have to deal with as part of our jobs. But just based on that slide we saw before with all of the different responsibilities, aside from just the inherent challenges presented by being in their industry, by being in business in general, they also were dealing with a little bit of self-inflicted pain. And really what that was the systems that they had in place to manage all of this and to maintain all of this critical information and perform these processes. So what were they dealing with? Well, really they were dealing with no consolidation of data. They had data all over the place, multiple trackers, multiple databases, multiple repositories. In many cases, these multiple repositories were storing and capturing the same data, which certainly can prove problematic. So because all of this information was sort of spread out all over, then there was no centralization of that data. It'd be nice to at least have everything in one place, even if it wasn't correlated, but certainly having everything so dispersed didn't give them any ability to correlate the data, to understand what the impacts of one item were on another, right? If I'm seeing a rise in security incidents, is that tied to a particular third party? Does that cause me to move the needle on a particular risk and require a more detailed response procedure? They just didn't have the ability to correlate that data because of no centralized repository. And then they really didn't have an ability to efficiently or effectively track or manage this information and to be able to report on it, to be able to say at any given point in time, this is where we stand. Right? This is something, as you'll see, was a major headache for this particular group. So in the best case scenario, this disconnection of data, this kind of sparse or distributed data set would lead to inefficiency, right? I need to be able to produce reporting or cobble together all of the data. So at best, we're talking about an inefficient process. What's a lot more frightening and certainly a lot more concerning for this particular team was the fact that because of this disconnect, because of this lack of data correlation, there really could be an opportunity to miss something very critical, something potentially catastrophic by not being able to see the interrelationships or see how one thing, really impacted another thing within the organization. So this slide is really just a kind of a visual representation of that. And it's just sort of an example of, all of these different programs they were responsible for. And as you can see across the top, you can see the different tools they were using, the volume of the data, where that information is being stored. It's interesting when you look at the tools used column, see Word and Access and Excel. I see that repeated pretty much in every single row. But again, those are similarities in name only. If they're managing everything in Access or they were managing everything in Excel, that didn't mean that the Access or the Excel files were integrated with one another. They were using the same technology, but it was still effectively multiple individual siloed systems, and that was causing a lot of problems. Now, on the volume, it's a maintainable, or it was a maintainable situation for them. But what they were really concerned about was, well, what if the volume goes up? What if we see a spike in activity? What if we see, a lot of things change here? Do we have an infrastructure that adequately prepares us for that? And then you can even see, where they're storing the information completely varies. We've already kind of covered that concept. An actual kind of quote from their director of information security, it was just a lot of manual processes, end quote. That's a direct quote. So extremely manual if you have to repeat the word 3 times. So even with those consistency in the tools they used, everything was disparate and they were similar in name only. So disparate systems plus duplicate or potentially missing data really equals a lack of insight. And so this is what this organization was really facing. And this was the challenge that they found themselves kind of dealing with. So the prediction then, right? We reached this proverbial fork in the road, or they reached this proverbial fork in the road, and they saw it as they really had 2 primary options. Option 1 is keep doing what we're doing, stay the course. This is fine. We've been doing it for a while. Everybody knows how it works. That's a common refrain we hear from a lot of different clients is, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The problem was it was broken. But certainly comfort and know-how certainly come into play when resisting change. So you could stay the course and risk the fact that something catastrophic, like the failure of a key third party or a major security incident, or even just an increase in volume in transactions, could really cause the whole system to break down and cause something major to be missed. Option 2 in the fork was to do something about it, to do something different, to find a system, find a set of processes that really help them along the way and help them do things a better way. Take on this monumental responsibility and take it on in such a way that it made it very manageable, very meaningful. So we kind of talked about it at the beginning. You're talking about really good, smart people who are being held back by systemic issues. Well, the good news is good, smart people eventually get tired of using broken processes And that was very much the case with this team. And they chose option two. They decided to do something about it. They decided to fix it, fix the system so that they could do their jobs more effectively. And so that's exactly what they did. And we're going to talk about that in the next few slides. What did they do to fix it? Well, we're going to look at this approach that they took in three distinct parts. Part number one really is about that data consolidation. So think of it as almost like, let's just sit down and do an inventory of the information that we need, an inventory of the individual data points that we can capture, we have the access to, or that we need in order to make informed decisions. So identifying those critical data elements was really the first step on this journey. From there, it was really getting a little bit more intricate, understanding those data elements and understanding those critical interrelationships. For example, if I have a third party that I'm relying upon in order to be able to effectively execute a business continuity plan or put one of those into place, I need to understand that relationship. I need to know how those two things are intertwined. So they set about doing that systematically. And then, once they had the data, they had their hands around what data they wanted and how it was interrelated and it was captured. Then it became about setting a review cadence. How often do we need to review this? How often do I need to assess the risk of a third party or review the state of a particular set of security incidents or so forth, right? There are a lot of involved parties here, not just within this team of 8 people, but certainly within the business, within the so-called first line. They needed to make sure they knew who within the business was responsible, who was on the hook for making sure things were happening. And that really got into assigning clear responsibility. So setting the cadence, assigning the responsibility so that when the time was right, when the time came, they knew who was responsible, what needed to be done, and whether or not was being done, right? So for example, with vendors, they know they wanted to perform ongoing assessments and evaluations of their vendors, of their third parties. So they wanted to establish a evaluation that had meaningful data points that they could evaluate and use to analyze the risk level within that vendor. They wanted to schedule that so that it would happen on a routine basis. And maybe it's not just every 3 months or 6 months. It could be driven by other factors, such as how critical is this vendor to our operations based on other factors. And then using those results to drive action, right? Using those scores to highlight where, hey, maybe we need to shore something up in this relationship, or we need to go a little bit deeper on a due diligence review, as an example. So because of this, because they were able to kind of structure and consolidate and relate this data, they now had this ability to put that data to work for them, to activate the data, right? So now that it's structured, now that it's centralized, the team got real-time views into status of what was happening. They could access that data and clearly understand the relationships just by looking into that portal and looking into those key reports they had put together. And they had the ability to dig deeper when they needed to, whether that was just them doing their own research or setting up certain alerts or criteria that required a deeper level of evaluation. They now had the ability to do that. So all of their critical data, the risks, the vendors, the continuity plans, the findings, the security incidents, and so forth, were now all being managed in a central repository. They had the ability to see the key interrelationships between the data and be able to evaluate all of those impacts from one centralized location. So that leads us into part two, right? Remember I said at best, you're talking about an inefficient process. Well, certainly they wanted to make everything more sound and more meaningful. But they also needed to focus on efficiency. So that's really what part two of their approach was thinking about their workflow process. So again, using vendor assessments as an example, you can see before, if they're dealing with 180 critical vendors, they were maintaining all that information in 180 different subfolders. And then they had multiple systems to do different things. One of them to schedule all of the activities and all of the touch points and follow-ups that they needed to have with the third party. Then they had one where they would store the vendors and understand what their tier was. And then another system or another place where they had to cobble all of that information together, piece it together, and produce the reporting. So again, decentralized, inefficient, and really a lack of ability not just to fully understand what's happening within one particular third party, but perhaps identify trends across multiple third parties. So what was the solution? Well, they created this concept of service record, so a vendor service record to streamline the management of that annual assessment process. Let's get it scheduled. Let's have the system kind of do some of that heavy lifting for us. And let's leverage automation to kind of automate those mundane tasks, right? The administrative kind of light lifting that ends up being heavy lifting because there can be so much of it. Well, let's automate that to the extent possible, and let's free up the time of these analysts to do the work that their job suggests: analyze, evaluate, review. So as a result of this, as a result of just a natural byproduct of centralizing and storing this information, they're no longer chasing information. They're no longer looking in 180 different places for individual vendor information. And they've taken advantage of that automation of the mundane to really make their process a lot better. So this quote: real-time status monitoring, we had none. Any sort of consolidated reporting and metrics aggregation was coming from multiple sources. Sometimes that took days. Days. I mean, that's crazy. I think they recognize that that was something that was unacceptable. If they have an executive or that's demanding information, or they have a significant issue emerging in a particular area, you can't go back and say, well, that's going to take me a few days to get that report together. That just became unacceptable to them. And so they did something about it. That leads us into phase 3, which was really all about creating visibility. So this organization's foundational need was rooted in that ability to produce effortless, up-to-date reporting. So before, they had no capability for self-service. It was a request, and it was a request that often took way longer than anyone really had the patience for. So for this, they turned to Onspring's dynamic reporting and dashboarding capabilities. And this functionality really let them meet the needs of a broad range of users. Everyone from those analysts who are performing the day-to-day work and those evaluations, all the way up through to the executives who want that on-demand, I need it now reporting on any and all aspects of the program, and really anyone in between, just to help keep things moving through the process. So key information like vendor tiers and risk ratings, contract values, findings in security incidents and their relative severity or criticality, all of that could then be visualized, could be interrelated, and could be delivered in these dynamic reports. And then there's a number of different ways they can leverage that reporting as well to kind of do what they need to do. And to kind of take that one step further, this really led to more transparency within the process, within the workflows. So just understanding where people are in the process, sometimes that's very helpful. Just knowing that something is being worked on, something has been assigned, something is being addressed, and having a mechanism to follow up with those individuals just to be sure that what they say they're doing, they're actually doing. So what were the results? Well, there were really 3 primary goals that they were able to achieve. The first, it's something we've been repeating a lot, but I think it makes a lot of sense: having that central repository, all of that critical information in one place with that ability to interrelate the data wherever it makes sense. Gaining those efficiencies through automated workflows was the second point, right? Just being able to take away those inefficiencies and really streamline this for the analysts. Present to them, these are the things we're expecting you to do today, making it very meaningful and allowing them to really focus on what their key responsibilities were rather than dealing with those mundane activities. And then being able to aggregate that data, status visualization, risk posture, all with that drill down capability so that you can get very narrow whenever you need to. So to kind of contrast that other quote, reporting was a huge win. The real-time dashboards, the visualizations, and then our executive board reporting was all right there. That was the payoff for them. Just all of the work that they did to structure, consolidate, automate, and report, they now look like heroes. They have the ability to go right to the executive leadership and at a moment's notice just present their status and exactly where things stand. So that's the conclusion of the case study. The thing I'd like to leave you with is, at Onspring, we love stories like this. We want to write more stories like this. So you may be finding yourself in a situation where you're struggling with inefficiencies or disparate data, or you've got a system that's just not working, for you. These are conversations we love to have. And so I've put my email address up there, jason@onspring.com. Bring me your business challenge. I'd love to talk to you about it. I'd love to see how we here at Onspring might be able to help you. I want to thank you for watching my session today, and certainly look forward to any questions that you guys have. And hope you have a great day. Thank you. Hey, everybody. Well, I guess it wouldn't be a work from home or a remote working situation if there wasn't some sort of a glitch. So for those of you who hung around and heard me say the first 10 minutes of my presentation a second time, I certainly appreciate you. Definitely appreciate you guys being a part of this. So you guys had a couple of questions come in. I'm going to try to address those as quickly and completely as possible. Certainly as other questions come up, or you want to learn more, you can come visit us at the Onspring booth. Some of my favorite people in the world are currently hanging out in that booth right now and ready to answer any questions you guys have. So let's just get to some of your questions. So I jotted them down. One of them was, how was end user adoption after making such a big shift from multiple systems into one? As much as I'd like to tell you, it was great. Everybody rallied around it. It was the best thing they had ever seen. It was change. And inherently that change was painful. I kind of mentioned it in the presentation that people get comfortable, people get used to doing things the way that they're used to doing them. So making that sort of change, certainly one that significant to go from this very intricate way of doing things and even into a nice, clean central repository is not something that they're going to adapt to overnight. Now, the good news is, number one, we were able to anticipate this, get out ahead of that, give them some resources, prep them through training and just socialization of how things were going to start to look, even just comparing and contrasting. Here's how you did this before. Here's how you're going to do this in the future. So those things really help just to get out ahead of it. And truth be told, even though the change itself was a little bit painful initially for these guys, once they got into the new system, once they saw how much time and effort and energy it saved them and the insights that they can gain much quicker, they started to realize that they, being kind of just the general user population, started to realize that, hey, we don't have to do these kind of mundane, labor intensive type of things anymore, things that just felt like administrative heavy lifting. Instead, we can focus on being analysts. We can focus on being information security professionals or vendor risk managers or whatever our primary role was. And I think it was a very kind of short turnaround, probably about a month or so, where everyone was just really comfortable with the way things were working. You think it takes about 20 times of doing something to make that a habit for a human. Well, that's one work month. And by properly preparing them, feeding them the information they needed, we were able to make that transition as smooth as possible, even though we always anticipate a little bit of pain. The second question that I took down was, do you use any assessments to gauge risks associated with regulations such as NIST or PCI, for example? Absolutely. I think that was one of the driving forces for getting this central repository into place. Was, one of the key factors in having this central repository, one of the key benefits is first being able to set that benchmark to understand, well, what are we even aligning ourselves against? And then, because they had set it up in a central repository and they had structured their controls, their risks, the way that we had consulted them to, they were really able to adopt that ask once, answer many approach, where I might have a particular risk that I'm managing or a particular control procedure in place. And I know that control procedure allows me to pick off requirements from 3 or 4 different regulations. Well, in their old world of decentralization, obviously that was 3 or 4 different audit efforts. And if I'm the control owner or the risk manager, and I've got someone coming to me every month asking me for, how I do something, or do you have evidence that this has been done? At best, I'm going to get a little bit annoyed. At worst, maybe something does get missed. But now in this case, because this was a key driver, the ability to align these assessments against these regulatory requirements, they certainly took full advantage of that capability. And quickly, to get to the last question that I received, how cumbersome was the implementation given the size and the scope? Really, the most cumbersome part was it really lied within what we would call the analyze phase, which is gathering all of those key requirements, understanding where all of that information currently lives, figuring out how the interrelationships needed to work when it landed in one location. But we spent a lot more time on that planning piece, right? And it's, the ounce of planning is worth or an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, as they say. So putting all of that time into planning basically meant that we weren't configuring or building solutions that went in all different directions and neglected key requirements. Those were all primary considerations before we ever made one keystroke within the system, before we ever built anything for them. So to answer that question, typically what we see for any sort of major process area or these process areas, we're talking a matter of weeks, probably, on average 6 to 8 weeks from the analyze phase beginning all the way through to getting those end users in the system, testing, and actually using the system on a day-to-day basis. Certainly that could vary depending on the complexity or the extent of the process, but we tend to measure those types of efforts in weeks, which is really nice and refreshing for a lot of people to hear. So I know we're about to run out of time. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me, jason@onspring.com. Visit my friends in the Onspring booth, and I hope you have a really great day and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.